The police entered the house thinking it would be just another routine check, but something was wrong from the very first step. The smell of freshly baked cake still lingered in the air, too sweet for a place that should have been empty for decades. The lights were on, not all of them, just enough to make it seem like someone was still awake. The clock on the wall showed 7:40 p.m. It wasn't moving. The living room was decorated for a children's party. Colorful balloons tied with plain tape, nothing sophisticated. A crooked sign read, "Happy Birthday" in hand-cut letters. On the table, disposable plates were already served, glasses with flat soda, and a cake with unlit candles, still warm to the touch. The strangest detail, the name written in the icing was still fresh, as if it had been made that night. The neighbors said the family had disappeared in 1992. Father, mother, a 6-year-old boy. No change of address, no note, no bank withdrawals. They simply vanished. The house had been locked ever since, officially sealed. Even so, there wasn't enough dust to justify 30 years of abandonment. There were recent footprints on the carpet, small ones, child's footprints. In the kitchen, an old radio played softly, stuck on a station that no longer existed. The music skipped, repeated sections, as if it were also stuck in time. One of the police officers turned off the appliance. The silence that followed was too heavy, almost awkward, as if someone had been interrupted in the middle of something important. Upstairs, the boys' room was tidy, bed made, toys lined up, clothes laid out on the chair. A wrapped gift rested on the floor with a handwritten card, "For you when the time is right." There was no signature, no date. The paper didn't look old. It looked forgotten for minutes, not years. It was there that one of the agents asked the question that no one wanted to answer aloud. If the family disappeared in 1992, who threw the party? And more importantly, for whom was it still happening? The official report stated that the family had disappeared in April 1992, but no document explained why the house remained alive. There were no signs of forced entry, struggle, or hasty escape. The landline phone still worked. The refrigerator was plugged in. Inside, fresh, unexpired food, organized as if someone were going to use it the next day. One of the police officers opened a juice carton. It was cold. Someone was paying that bill. Someone was returning there. The older neighbors remembered the family with uncomfortable clarity. The father left early for work. The mother took the boy to school. The boy's birthday was in May. There was always a simple party, few guests, homemade cake. Nothing drew attention, nothing indicated danger, until one day, silence arrived and never left. No moving truck, no relatives searching, no bodies found. The house simply remained. In the police files, there was a strange handwritten note, unsigned. It simply read, "Last activity recorded, preparation." No explanation of what that meant, no follow-up. The case was filed as a voluntary disappearance, although no one could prove where that family might have gone without money, without documents, and without leaving any trace. When the agents began photographing the house, they noticed something unsettling. All the family photos on the walls stopped in the same year, 1992. No later images, no record of the boy growing up. It was as if time had refused to move forward inside. Even the calendar in the kitchen was open to May of that year, with a red circle marking his birthday. In the trash, they found recent packages of flour, eggs, and sugar. The manufacturing codes indicated dates from the 2000s. This wasn't old waste, it was continuous use. The house wasn't abandoned, it was being maintained, just not by people the world still recognized as alive. Before leaving that night, one of the police officers returned to the living room and noticed something no one had noticed before. One of the candles on the cake was crooked, as if it had been blown out hastily, or as if someone had blown out and been interrupted. And then the idea arose that no one wanted to accept aloud. Perhaps the party had never ended. Perhaps it was just waiting for the main guest to arrive at the right time. And if that's true, then the question changes. It's not, what happened to the family? It's, what happens to whoever interrupts the celebration? In the school records, the boy's name appeared only until the first semester of 1992. After that, there was a blank space, no transfer, no formal justification, only the word absent, repeated until the end of the school year. The teacher, already elderly when she was located years later, remembered him with a frightening precision. She said he was too quiet for his age, too polite, as if afraid of taking up space. She also said that in the week of his disappearance, he commented something strange. "My party will last more than a day." At the time, everyone laughed. Inside the house, the police found children's drawings stored in a drawer. They all seemed normal at first glance. Houses, sun, family holding hands. But looking closely, there was a disturbing pattern. In all the drawings, the boy was always the same size. The adults changed position, the settings varied, but he remained identical. 6 years old. Always 6. On one of the papers, someone had written over it, in adult handwriting, "Don't grow up too fast." The room showed no signs of continuous use by a real child. There wasn't enough dust to suggest neglect, but there was also no natural wear and tear. The toys were too pristine. A toy car on the floor had clean wheels, as if it had never been pushed. A teddy bear sat on the bed, staring at the door. Inside it, the agents found something that shouldn't be there, a small, old, still functional tape recorder. When they pressed play, they heard a short recording with background noise. The voice was a child's, clear, close to the microphone. They said if I stayed quiet, the party would never end. After that, silence. No crying, no pleas for help, just the click of the tape ending. The recorder was undated, but the model only began to be sold years after the disappearance. It was at this point that the investigation strayed from logical ground, because it was no longer about a common crime. It was about something that continued to happen without needing the original people. The house seemed to maintain its routine on its own. It prepared, it organized, it waited, as if it had learned a single purpose and refused to forget it. A police psychologist raised a hypothesis that never made it into the official report. He said that certain places absorb intense emotional events and begin to repeat them like a memory that doesn't know it's over. An interrupted children's birthday party would be, according to him, the exact type of event that could freeze a space in time. Nobody took it seriously, officially. But that same night, while the house was empty, a neighbor swore he heard children's music coming from there. Low, slow, the same melody that used to play at the boys' parties. When the police returned, the sound had stopped. On the living room table, the cake was different. A slice had been cut. If nobody went in, and if nobody went out, who continued celebrating the birthday of that boy who never turned 7? Deep inside a drawer in the living room, folded several times as if consulted repeatedly, lay a yellowed sheet of paper with the title written in blue pen, "Birthday Guests." It wasn't a long list, just 6 names, all written in the same careful handwriting as her mother. Schoolmates, 2 cousins, a neighbor. Next to each name, a small square, as if to mark attendance. None were checked. When the police searched for these people, they discovered something even more unsettling. None of them remembered going to the party. Some remembered the invitation, others remembered the date, but they all said the same thing. Something prevented them from going. One suddenly fell ill. Another had to travel urgently. One completely forgot, as if the commitment had been erased from memory. No explanation seemed serious enough to justify such a specific collective forgetfulness. One of the cousins, now an adult, said something that no one could ignore. She recounted that on the night of the birthday, she dreamed she was at the family home. She said there were balloons, music, a beautiful cake. She said the boy was standing in the center of the room, looking at her without smiling. When she tried to approach him, he said a phrase that never left her head. "You arrived too early." She woke up crying and never told anyone until the police contacted her. The phone records from 1992 showed something strange. That night, calls had been made from the house to some of the guests. None were completed. The phone rang, and then stopped. There was no message. There was no voice on the other end.
It was as if someone was testing if there was still anyone willing to answer. In a box in the closet, the agents found small bags of party favors already. Inside them were candies that hadn't yet expired, and small toys identical to those sold in stores years later. One detail stood out. Each bag had a name written on it, including names that weren't on the original list. Some belonged to people who currently lived on the street, people who had never met the family. A more experienced investigator noticed something the others ignored. The new names belonged to residents who had moved to the area after 1992, people who somehow had become part of the house's surroundings, as if the event were updating itself, adapting the guest list, trying to complete the party that never happened. That night, a temporarily installed surveillance camera captured something that shouldn't exist. At 11:59 p.m., the front door opened by itself. No one entered. Even so, at 12:01 p.m., a new plate appeared on the table. A small plate, a child's plate, placed in the empty spot that always faced the cake. Perhaps the mistake was thinking the birthday was only for that child. Perhaps the house was just waiting for enough guests to move on to the next moment. And if someone accepted the invitation, what exactly would happen after the birthday song? The first new resident on the street disappeared in 1998. A single man, predictable routine, no history of problems. The previous week, he had commented to a neighbor that he felt something strange coming from the abandoned house. He said that sometimes he heard low laughter at night, like an old recording playing too far away. He also said that once he found a red balloon attached to the fence, new, shiny, as if it had been placed there that day. Nobody took it seriously. On the night of his disappearance, he returned home later than usual. Street cameras show him passing in front of his family's former residence. He stops. He looks at the gate for a few seconds. Then something changes in his posture. He doesn't seem scared. He seems invited. The camera cuts out at that exact moment. When it returns, the gate is closed again. The police searched the house the next day. Nothing out of place, no signs of a struggle, no strange objects. But the living room table was different. There was an extra plate, a glass with signs of recent use, and next to the cake, a gift that hadn't been there before. A simple wrapping with cheap paper and a card written in childish handwriting. "Thank you for coming." The man's body was never found. The case was treated as a voluntary disappearance, despite there being no reason for him to flee. But after that, small details began to repeat themselves. Whenever someone commented they felt too curious about the house, something changed inside. A new balloon, an extra plate, a replaced candle, as if the event were progressing slowly, guest by guest. An investigator tried to establish a temporal pattern. He discovered that the changes only occurred on dates close to the boy's birthday, not exactly on the day, but in the week, as if it had a margin of tolerance, as if it accepted delays, but didn't give up. The most disturbing came from a report that never was released. In it, an agent wrote that upon leaving the house that night, he heard a child singing softly behind him. It wasn't a whole song, it was just the beginning of the happy birthday song, always interrupted before the last line. The agent wrote only one sentence at the end of the document. The party doesn't want to end as long as someone can still arrive. And here is a point that almost nobody notices. None of the people who disappeared after 1992 was seen leaving the house. None. They all enter. None return. As if accepting the invitation was a one-way street. Perhaps the mistake was not investigating that family's past. Perhaps the mistake was allowing the party to continue into the present. Because if a birthday needs guests to end, how many more people are needed for someone to finally blow out the candles?
In 2004, the police decided on something simple, and which later became clear was extremely wrong. Remove all objects from the house and seal it off completely. No visitors, no curious onlookers, no attention. The idea was to break the cycle. When the officers began packing the items from the living room, they noticed that some gifts were heavier than they should have been. Small but dense boxes, as if they contained something too solid for children's toys. One of the officers opened one right there. Inside, there were no toys. There were personal belongings, a men's wristwatch, a set of keys, an empty wallet, all items that belonged to the man who disappeared in 1998. In another package, there was an old cell phone, turned off but with a charged battery. The model was only released years after the family's disappearance. On every gift, without exception, there was an identical card: "You've arrived." In the evidence storage room, something even stranger happened. The boxes began to move on their own, not dramatically, just small displacements. A gift that had been cataloged reappeared off the shelf, closer to the door, as if it were trying to return. A technician suggested human error until an internal camera clearly showed one of the boxes sliding a few centimeters on its own at 7:40 p.m., the same time locked on the house clock. That night, an agent who participated in the removal dreamed about the party. In the dream, he wasn't an adult, he was small. He was sitting at the table, his legs dangling without reaching the floor. In front of him, the cake. Around him, chairs occupied by people he recognized, but whose faces he couldn't see. On the other side of the table, the birthday boy stared at him without blinking. "Did you bring the present?" he asked. The agent woke up with his heart racing and the feeling that he had forgotten something important. The next day, one of the boxes disappeared from the warehouse. No entry record, no exit record, just an empty space on the shelf and a torn label on the floor. In the sealed house, the agents found something new: an extra chair positioned at the table, facing the cake. On top of it, a police cap, the same model worn by the officer who had the dream. It was at this point that the order changed. It was no longer to remove objects. It was to return everything exactly as it was. Every gift, every dish, every detail, as if someone were trying to calm something that had been provoked. The house was reopened only long enough to return the items. When they finished, the general feeling was one of relief, as if a pressure had lessened. But before leaving, one of the police officers noticed a new detail on the poster in the room. Between the crooked letters of "Happy Birthday," someone had added in faint, almost invisible pencil, "Just a few left." Perhaps that party wasn't arresting people out of malice. Perhaps it was simply demanding the presence of those who touched it. And the question starts to get uncomfortable now. When someone messes with something that never ended, how do they leave without being counted as a guest? After the objects were returned, something changed. It didn't get better, it became more attentive. The house no longer manifested with frequent noises or visible changes. Instead, it began to register, as if it had understood that humans were now observing and decided to observe back. Technicians installed discrete sensors to monitor activity. No movement, no abnormal temperature variation. But every night, at exactly 7:40 p.m., the sensors registered occupancy. The detail is that they didn't indicate movement. They indicated static presence, like people sitting. Many. Always the same number. 6 signals. The same number of guests from the original list. No more, no less. The house wasn't expanding the event. It was trying to complete it correctly. An analyst noticed something that had gone unnoticed for years. The guest list had 6 names, but the table had 7 places. It always had. One place was empty, facing the cake. It wasn't for the boy. It was too big. It was for an adult. When they cross-referenced the names on the list with the family records, they understood too late. The 7th place was for the father, and the father never arrived at the party. The man had gone out to buy something that afternoon in 1992. He never returned. No body, no record, no explanation. What seemed like a detail became the center of everything. The party wasn't expecting random guests. It was expecting someone specific, someone who failed to arrive on time. From that day on, the accounts changed tone. Neighbors began to see a man standing outside the house at night, always with his back turned, always motionless. When someone tried to approach, he wouldn't turn around, he would just disappear. One resident swore he heard an adult voice coming from the house, low, tired, repeating, "I just arrived a little late."
In 2010, a social worker disappeared after insisting on reopening the case as a family kidnapping. He said it wasn't supernatural, it was institutional negligence. He said someone needed to take responsibility. The next week, he was seen entering the house with a folder of documents. He never left. Inside the house that same night, a new candle appeared on the cake, bigger than the others, not childish. The house didn't want curious people. It didn't want strangers. It wanted correction. It wanted to close something that had been left open. And anyone who tried to resolve things in the wrong place ended up occupying a seat that wasn't theirs. Perhaps that's why no one managed to save that family, because the house isn't stuck in the past. It's stuck in the idea that everything needs to end the right way. And if someone tries to force a closure, it simply adjusts the list of who still needs to arrive.
In 2015, something different happened. For the first time in decades, the house was completely silent on its anniversary. No music, no lights, no presence registered by the sensors at 7:40 p.m. For the technicians, it seemed like the end. For the residents of the street, it was the first day in years they could sleep without that strange feeling of being watched by something that didn't blink. That afternoon, a man appeared on the street, asking about the house. He didn't seem lost. He seemed late. He told a neighbor that he had lived abroad for many years and needed to resolve an old matter. When asked his name, he hesitated for a second, as if choosing the right answer. Then he gave the surname of the missing family. The cameras show the man entering the house shortly before 7:40 p.m. For the first time, the door opened by itself from the inside out, as if it had been waiting. There was no image failure. There was no interference. Everything was recorded. At 7:41 p.m., the house turned on all the lights. At 7:42 p.m., the music began. Not children's music, a slow, almost solemn piece of music. Inside the house, sensors registered 7 presences. 7. For the first time, the number was complete. The table was full, the cake was cut correctly with no slices left over. The sign on the wall changed on its own. Where it had previously read, "Happy Birthday," now there was something written in adult handwriting. "Sorry I'm late." At 8:10 p.m., the sensors all shut down at once. The house went dark. When the police entered minutes later, they found everything different. There was no cake, no balloons, no presents. The house was empty, aged, accumulated dust, like a house that had truly been abandoned since 1992. In the boys' room, they found only a photo on the bed. The whole family, smiling as they had never been seen before. On the back, a short phrase, "Now we can go." No body, no physical evidence, no man found. The case was closed that same week. Officially, it was all just a collective misinterpretation, mixed with vandalism and coincidences. The censors were removed. The house was sold years later as a regular property. But there's a detail that prevents the story from ending. In the new property, the residents report something simple and persistent. Every year, on the same day, at 7:40 p.m., the living room clock stops for exactly 1 minute. No more, no less. 1 minute of silence. Perhaps the party ended. Or perhaps it was only ended in that place. Because if something truly says goodbye, why does it still insist on remembering the exact time it began? Months after the case was officially closed, a supplementary report was filed, without disclosure. It wasn't mandatory. It wasn't requested. It was written by a single investigator who participated in the case from the beginning. The document didn't talk about phenomena, nor theories. It talked about human behavior, from simple mistakes that no one wanted to admit in 1992. According to him, the police never confirmed where the father was that afternoon, not because there weren't any clues, but because no one insisted. A last-minute work call, a promise to return quickly,
a delay considered too small to become an emergency. The report said something direct and uncomfortable. If someone had gone looking that night, perhaps none of this would have happened. The investigator raised a hypothesis ignored by everyone. What if the family had never disappeared supernaturally? What if they simply waited, waiting for the father to return, waiting for the party to begin, waiting for someone to knock on the door and say everything was all right? The problem wouldn't have been time stopping, it would have been abandonment. In the city's hospital records, there was a curious entry in 1992. A man with the same name as the father was treated that night with mental confusion and disorientation. He was released hours later. The address he provided was incomplete. No follow-up was done. No calls to the family. The investigator wrote only, "He tried to return." This changes everything, because if the father returned too late and found the house empty, perhaps he stayed. Perhaps he tried to wait too. And when institutions fail, when no one closes the story properly, something remains, suspended, not by magic, by accumulated negligence. The report ends with a phrase that was never discussed in any meeting. Places don't hold people. People hold places. If that were true, then the house wasn't haunted. It was burdened with an expectation that no one acknowledged. After the document was filed, the investigator requested early retirement. Years later, in an informal interview, he said something that sums it all up. The mistake wasn't entering the house. It was arriving too late when there was still time. And this leads to an uncomfortable question for those watching this story now. How many situations seem closed simply because time has passed? How many people were left waiting for an answer, a return, a presence that never came? Perhaps the case of Birthday Boy isn't about ghosts. Perhaps it's about what happens when no one shows up at the right time. And if that's true, how many parties are still happening in silence, waiting for someone to realize it's past their time to arrive?